spoilers? Oh, lots and lots of spoilers.
We stand at the dawn of a new era, a new world. A new series here at Max Mike Movies. Semi-real people, our study of biopics. And by biopics, I mean movies that are meant to be factual or semi-factual stories about actual non-fictional real-type people. And by study, I mean watch and yammer about.
That's my favorite part.
Yep, we're punting this new series off with Chaplin, the 1992 film about the life of Charlie Chaplin, the legendary Little Tramp, which coincidentally is Mike's nickname for me. And who am I? Well, I'm that legend in my own mind, Max Levine, and way o'er yonder is that star of Stagecoach and Screen Door, Mike Buster Loose.
Buster?
Why not?
Okay.
Yes, Buster, like Keaton.
I do feel a little icy hot right now. Okay. Sorry, that's a real deeper.
Yeah, seriously.
You don't remember, do you?
No.
I'm Buster Crab for icy hot.
Buster Crab did Icy Hot
Yeah.
ads? I did not remember that at all.
Yeah.
But a couple of things before we leap into this. We are still considering doing our live show.
Ooh.
So we still want to hear from you. We're also going to start doing a little thing. We're going to be doing a poll question.
Ooh.
Just a little question we want to ask you.
And you can respond to us in ways that
Yep.
we won't tell you till later.
Yes, exactly. But it'll be on the website, and it'll be us telling you. But this week, and we'll ask the question, we'll get your responses, and we'll talk about our responses to it also next week. Mm-hmm. Has there ever been a movie you walked out on? I don't mean like because the theater was on fire or you'd had just a little too much killer chili dinner, or you stopped at Taco Bell or anything like that. I mean, the movie, for some reason, made you want to leave. Just, we'd like to know.
Yeah.
And if so, what was the movie and why did you want to leave?
Yeah. And then if we get comments, we'll use them on the show.
Yes, we will.
For free.
For free. Well, you'll get half of what we get.
Wow. Can we afford that?
I think so.
Oh.
But we move on now to trivia.
But first, a pause. The show.
That was the best pause ever. This film was not exactly a financial success. The budget was $31 million. The worldwide gross was $9.5 million.
Oh, dear.
Now, it was a critical success to a certain degree, and it scored 3 Oscar nominations. One was Best Actor for Robert Downey Jr., Best Art Direction, and Best Original Score. It didn't win any.
Oops.
Yeah. This was really one of the high points for actor Robert Downey Jr. Unfortunately, it also kind of marked the beginning of the downward trend in his personal life, the dark years of like 95 to 2001 when he slid deeper and deeper into addiction. Which he did turn himself around and ended up in a little indie film called Ironic Man or something. I forget.
Never heard of it.
Yeah, me neither. This was directed by famed actor Sir Richard Attenborough.
Were it?
Who you may remember as the man who spared no expense in Jurassic Park. And tons of other stuff. But,
apparently he spared no expense on this film either.
the original cut of this movie was almost 4 hours long, and they shot over 200 hours of footage.
Okay.
Yeah, the movie's about 2 hours 20, roughly.
Yeah, it was.
Yeah. There is an actual Chaplin in this movie.
Yes.
Geraldine Chaplin, Chaplin's daughter, plays her own grandmother.
My own grandma.
Yep, pretty much. And apparently on set, she recalled in an interview later, when she first saw Downey in full costume, she was so stunned at how much he looked like her late father, she couldn't talk. She just stood there staring at him.
Well, luckily her part wasn't very big, so...
Yeah. Contrary to what's presented, there are a number of, and we're going to deal with this, things that are left out, things that are flat out inaccurate, but despite what's presented in the movie, Charlie Chaplin did have a child with Mildred Harris. Mm-hmm. his second wife. Their son, Norman Spencer Chaplin, died 3 days after his birth.
Yep.
Yeah. This movie was originally going to be called Charlie, because that's how everybody knew him. His friends, his family, his fans, they all called him Charlie. However, there was a film in 1968, the Cliff Robertson movie Charlie, with a Y, and they complained that the title would lead to confusion with their movie from 20 years prior.
Never mind the famous perfume.
Yeah, yes, that's right. Which was, because that this movie is kind of free, kind of wow.
Charlie. Deeper Day. It's Deeper Day here at the old podcast.
Yeah, I gotta say, I don't think there'd be a lot of confusion between a movie about a mentally handicapped man who is surgically altered and Charlie friggin' Chaplin, but whatever.
Well, I can see the similarities right there.
Sir Richard Attenborough turned down a whole bunch of movie roles because of obligations to the movies he directed. During the post-production and promotion of this movie, of Chaplin, he almost had to do it again when Spielberg offered him the role of John Hammond in Jurassic Park. But Spielberg offered to move his production schedule, the whole schedule, to accommodate Attenborough. He wanted him that bad.
Wow.
Yeah. To prepare for his role, Downey learned how to play the violin and play tennis left-handed, because he's not left-handed and Chaplin was.
Huh.
He also got a coach to help him imitate Charlie Chaplin's posture and mannerisms.
However, his accent, well, we'll get to that.
Well, yeah. Charlie Chaplin's first wife, I'm wrong here, yeah, the one that he did have the child who died at age 3 days, Mildred Harris, was 16 when they met, had an affair, and got married all in the same year. She is played in this movie by Mila Jovovich. I can never stop.
I have to give Max a shove.
Yeah, Mila Jovovich, who played Harris. She was awkwardly also 16 at the time of the filming, including her nude scenes.
Oh, did we break a law again?
Yeah,
we watched the movie. There. I think we broke a law.
I think we might have. Yeah.
Yuck.
Yeah. There is only one principal character in this movie who is fictional, and that's George Hayden, allegedly Chaplin's editor, played by Sir Anthony Hopkins. It's the only one they just made up. He didn't exist.
No.
Chaplin wrote his own autobiography. There were other books, which is mostly what this movie is based on, his autobiography.
Right.
Charlie Chaplin's eyes were described as strikingly blue by those who knew him.
Oops.
Robert Downey's are hazel.
Strikingly brown.
Yeah. They look dark brown, and brighter lighting in some of his scenes in some of the movies. You can see that they're hazel with green highlights, but they are very much not blue.
I mean, let's face it, though. Charlie Chaplin's mostly known from black and white films. I doubt anybody knew.
Yeah. Although his eyes tend to look pale in some of the close-ups. Besides Geraldine Chaplin, who was actually in 2 of her father's movies, there's only one other actor in the cast of Chaplin who had appeared in a movie with the real Charles Chaplin. That was the legendary Phil Brown.
Oh, yeah. I know.
Yes, you do know him. You know who he's best known as? He was Uncle Owen in Star Wars.
Wow.
Yes.
And what was he in this?
He wasn't in the movie Chaplin. He was in a Charlie Chaplin movie called A King in New York in 1957, where he played a projectionist.
Okay, but he has no connection to this film.
No, he has no connection to this film. He just has a connection to Charlie Chaplin.
I bet a lot of people do.
Yep.
That's a weird fact.
Oh, I'm sorry. Phil Brown also plays a projectionist in Chaplin. He is in Chaplin.
It's like, why are you bringing this? Hey, you know another actor who's been Fred.
Fine, this can go. Shut up. This can go on the blooper reel.
Do we have
There's
one?
a fair amount of other stuff, but not as much as you would have thought for this movie. A lot of it is who else was considered to play Charlie Chaplin. Some of which I don't know. Well, like one of them was Nicolas Cage.
Okay. Sure, he was a head taller than Charlie, but with his cape in front of his face, that Attenborough figured the audience would never know.
I've got to figure out the little tramp. The little tramp, man.
No.
Also,
dear Hollywood, no. Thank you.
Nick Nolte. Yeah, wouldn't that been something? Oh, yeah. Come on, Dunkirk. We got to go. We're going down to New Mexico. We're going to go to Salt Lake City and cut this film in the bathroom or something. I don't know. Hell, I don't know what movie I'm in. Who am I playing again? Sorry, Mr. Nolte. You're just so much fun. But there's a fair amount of other stuff, but we'll get into that as we actually go along.
Nick Nolte is Liza Minnelli in a film you won't believe.
Indeed. So brings us now to the plot.
Ah.
Yeah, I got to say, the plot section of these biopics is going to be pretty short. This movie follows the life of one Charles Spencer Chaplin. Good night, everybody. Now, a young British sprog who started out in music halls and became one of the most famous figures in film the world has ever seen. We see the tragedy of his mentally ill mother and his rapid rise to stardom in the emerging world of film, which I still maintain is a fad, as well as his many, many, many questionable decisions regarding his romantic life and how he was eventually banished from the United States to return in triumph almost 20 years later. Yeah, pretty much you could sum the plot up. It's a story of Charlie Chaplin told mostly by Charlie Chaplin.
Right. And now, the middle part.
Yep.
The lowdown. So Max, I know we ask this all the time, had you seen this when it came out?
I never saw it when it came out in the theaters. I saw chunks of it on TV. I'd watch for a little while and then I would stop. Had you seen it?
I rented it. And I think like the early 90s was a time, although to be fair, if I rented it, it might have been closer to the mid 90s, where I started looking for films other than what was being spoon-fed me by the local SAC or General Cinema.
Oh, you could have gotten in serious legal trouble for that.
Hey, I still went. Highlander 2.
Yeah.
But I started branching out and looking for things that were more interesting. And I think that the buzz about this film was the performance. This was a Robert Downey Jr., or at least at the time, this was considered the Robert Downey Jr.'s most amazing performance. And also looking back now, there was people in here I just did not remember that were there. Mila Jovovich, because she wasn't anybody then, right? We wouldn't know her for like another few years until she was, we got to see all of her in The Fifth Element. David Duchovny hadn't become David Duchovny yet because I think it was like he made this right before X-Files premiered, because X-Files I think was 93.
I think that's right, yeah.
So
nobody knew him. He plays Rolly, the projectionist / film editor, whatever they called them back then.
Yeah.
Dan Aykroyd is in this.
Yes, we see a lot of Dan Aykroyd.
As Max Sennett. My God, one of the legends.
Yeah.
The guy they called the King of Comedy.
Yeah, owner of, not Sennett Studios, that was one of the little mistakes.
No.
It was actually Keystone Studios from whence they got the Keystone Cops.
Yep, he was the one who invented the Keystone Cops.
If you don't know the Keystone Cops, I would say there were two things you probably know from silent era films if you know anything. Charlie Chaplin's number one, and the Keystone Cops are probably number two. Even if you've never seen a Keystone Cops film, you probably, like, that term brings up.
You recognize it. If you see a clip of them, you go, oh, yeah. Because the sheer level of influence that those movies have had on modern cinema, it cannot be overstated.
I think that Robert Downey Jr. does a credible job, but I actually think there's somebody in here who was better cast than he was.
Yeah, who's that?
I don't know about you, but there's literally nobody else I could think of to play Douglas Fairbanks than Kevin Kline.
Kevin Kline was born to play Douglas Fairbanks, and I believe this was Fairbanks Sr.
Yes.
Not Jr., yes. The greatest, one of the greatest action stars of the era.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. No, he was perfect.
Yeah. I totally believed he was Douglas Fairbanks. He swings around when he doesn't have to, just because that's what Fairbanks would do.
That's just what he liked to do.
You get the sense that he was a ladies' man, and maybe other things as well. Which,
probably.
That's a different biopicture. But it's Kevin Kline in his prime too, and back then Kevin Kline could do anything.
Damn him!
I'm surprised
Kevin Kline, to remind you, is my nemesis.
Yeah, sure. Well, to remind him.
Yeah. What do you mean remind? You think he ever knew? Oh, no. Kevin Kline, to me, is just proof again that the universe is completely unfair.
Yeah.
But also, did you recognize, I really hope you didn't, but did you recognize the girl who plays Mary Pickford?
I didn't, and when I saw her in the credits, I was like, what?
Yeah, that was whatever her name was from the legendary, I think it's 98 version of Godzilla with Matthew Broderick.
Well,
she's the love interest.
Well,
I can't even remember her character's name.
And then there was another entirely unrecognizable Marissa Tomei, and it's like, wait, she was in this?
Yep, and she's in like 2 scenes.
Yeah, but even still.
And she's great. She's great in both of them. She was, what was her name? Norman. She was one of the first female directors.
Right. And she gets all in Chaplin's face because he's just impossible.
Mabel Normand. That's right.
That's right. Because she did. There was something using her name. I forget what they were called, but the Mabel comedies or something like that. And she was one of the first directors to get Chaplin. And basically, Chaplin was like, "Yeah, that's nice. I want to do this myself." And as early on as he could, moved on to do his own things. Robert Downey Jr., I think, as his acting goes, does a really good job. As his accent goes, the problem is that his Cockney's okay. His upper class British, which to be fair, I'm willing to believe that Chaplin would have transitioned to as he rose through society.
Oh, he did. He was very embarrassed by his Cockney background, and he worked really, really hard to abolish not just the Cockney, but he wanted to get rid of the English accent in general. He didn't quite do it. But I think he was better at it than Downey is, because his slips quite a bit.
Yeah, and it's a hard thing to do. And to be fair, when we hear... Well, let's look at Bendy Straw Pickle Patch. When he was doing Doctor Strange, it's like, what part of the United States are you from? Because it's not clear. It's not New York, that's for sure. So, everybody has trouble with that, with maintaining an accent. But otherwise, the performance is very nuanced. We get a very romantic Charlie Chaplin, even if those are the very squidgy scenes that make us all go, ah!
Yeah. I mean, this is very much from his perspective. You can tell it was based on something he wrote, because it really does gloss over the more awkward elements of his life, especially the romantic ones and the sexual exploits and the fact that he was really into much younger women. I mean, good Lord, his last wife, Una O'Neill, who I want to talk about how she's portrayed. She had just turned 18, and he was.
No, she hadn't. She was 17.
Yeah. Oh no. According to I checked.
According to
the
Wikipedia,
bio,
she was 17 and he was 54.
Yeah. I had read she was but she's announced as a debutante, and you become a debutante usually when you hit 18.
Not in this case.
Well, I think they didn't get married until she was 18.
That's no better.
But he was. Yeah, there was a 36-year age difference.
Yeah, something they gloss over about Una O'Neill. You know where Dad was?
No.
Playwright Eugene O'Neill.
Oh, good Lord. Oh, yeah. You must have loved this.
So it's like, why did you... That's a pretty famous connection, but no, they just left it out.
There are some strange things they leave out in this, too. There is that big famous dinner scene or celebration scene at the end of World War I where they're all at a big table where Chaplin first meets J. Edgar Hoover.
Yeah, and he wasn't wearing a dress, because they got that wrong.
Yeah, they got that totally wrong. He's wearing men's clothes in every scene we see him in.
Yeah.
He's oddly played by, I thought fairly well, by Kevin Dunn, who is usually known... Kevin Dunn was a stand-up comic. He usually plays a lot of dads.
Okay.
And he actually is a pretty convincing Hoover, because Hoover came across very often as kind of harmless looking.
Okay.
And boy, was he not.
I bet he wasn't in a dress either.
No. But at that same dinner, we hear in the back, he's saying, right, you are Mr. Hearst. William Randolph Hearst is sitting at that table, as is his girlfriend, Marion. I can never remember her last name.
Oh, yeah, right, the actress.
Yeah, yes, who allegedly Chaplin may or may not have had an affair with as well. There's some... Part of old Hollywood legend is that Hearst tried to kill Chaplin on his boat and failed and killed someone else, and it all got hushed up. This is just allegedly. Let me make that clear. Allegedly.
Interestingly, it would not be the last assassination attempt, but we'll get to that. Which was like crazy crap that got left out of the movie. Anyway, Yeah, I didn't know about the whole, like, I didn't know that much about Chaplin's history before I saw this film, and I had forgotten it since I've seen it, and I didn't know about the whole what would eventually become the House Un-American Committee thing, which of course was really more Senator McCarthy. Thank you.
Yeah,
but
God.
J. Edgar is sitting there.
That putz.
Yeah, well, there was a whole bunch of them. J. Edgar just had a thing. He just hated Chaplin. Hated him. He hated him because he was over here on a green card and never applied for citizenship. He hated him because he thought he was a communist, although Chaplin throughout his life said no. The most he ever said was, I'm an anarchist. I think people should be free. Okay. But he just was like, I don't like the influence he's having. And to be fair, we're entering a whole new realm of potential influence and celebrity that had never existed before. The motion picture was literally reaching the entire world. And I looked into some of the money. Some of the money that they portray in the film isn't even close to what Charlie Chaplin was making. Because they made a big deal about how he wanted $1,000 and how Senate was like, no, I'm not going to give you $1,000. No, but this studio over here offered him $1,250. And then a year after that, he went to go to a new studio, which ended up being Mutual. They gave him a $150,000 signing bonus and $10,000 a week.
Which, you got to remember, this is like the 19-teens and the 1920s. That was a lot.
I'd take that now.
Yeah.
This is 100 years ago.
But the thing is, he was money in the bank. His early days, I don't think any of his first 30 movies, I don't think any of them lost money.
Well, and there was tons of Chaplin merch. So there was comics, toys, songs, all this stuff. And the deal was, for this $10K a week and this $150K signing bonus, is that Chaplin had to release a 2-reel film every month, which he did.
I did like how what Max Sennett says. This is apparently a real quote. Yeah. So, I do a class act. I don't put out more than 2 movies a week.
And then he went over to another company called First National Exhibitors Circuit, and he said, okay, I want $1 million for 8 movies. And that's when he built his studio. And they're like, okay, because this had never been seen before. Okay, sure, you might have heard of a performer of some sort. Or, we had records at this point, so there might be like, Caruso. People know who Caruso is.
Yeah, and scale of fame that it's unprecedented.
Yeah, it just did not exist. And so the problem is, you used to be able to make bad decisions and people wouldn't know about it. And with Chaplin, every decision he made, everybody knew about. And they kind of downplay that in the film, too, because some of his stories got leaked out. And there was actually, the people were protesting against some of Chaplin's films at various points in his career. But yeah, $1 million for 8 movies back in 18 or 19.
Unheard of. That was... That was like if you were making a joke, you said, "Oh yeah, I'll get $1 million." That's Dr. Evil sort of $1 million.
Yeah,
that's when $1 million meant a hell of a lot.
But like, for an example, The Gold Rush, we see a very little of this. This is one of his bigger films.
Oh yeah,
that film made over $5 million in its initial release.
Oh,
$5,019,20 whatever dollars. And that's right before you know what was about to happen. So, yeah.
By the way, that is true. It's a throwaway line, but for whatever reason, and he could never explain why, Chaplin dumped his entire stock portfolio the year before the crash. He dumped it all in 1928.
Yeah.
So he just sailed through the Depression.
All right. I think we should sort of circle back around because we're not even on a track. We started off with performances. Yep. I would say that the film... starts rather oddly, because it starts with Chaplin as a child, or actually no, it starts with him talking to Anthony Hopkins in Switzerland.
And that's kind of the framing device, yeah.
Right, and then suddenly we're in a Dickens novel.
Pretty much, yeah. His mother bombs on stage, so he jumps out, hams it up, and I got to say, I noticed that these people in the balcony are throwing coins at this small boy. I'm like, that really doesn't seem safe to me.
Well,
I know. That was how they made money, but it's like, yee.
I also just felt like they were a little, it was unlikely.
Yeah, kid wasn't that good. But.
No, and his mother wasn't that bad. She just wasn't interesting.
Yeah.
But whatever. There was nothing I could find that said that scene actually existed.
I do have to say, Downey, when he's being Chaplin and he's doing Chaplin's shtick, and he's trying to be funny, he's funny. His rich drunk at the theater, that made me laugh. I thought that was really hilarious. And when he really gets Chaplin's physical style down, and Chaplin was a remarkable acrobat. He had his physical comedy. No one had ever seen anything like it. No. Not even Buster Keaton or Harold Lloyd came close to that.
Well, theirs was very different. It was also very physical and demanding, but it was very, like, their stuff generally was, if I can time this exactly right, nobody gets hurt and it looks amazing. Whereas Chaplin's like, I can fall and then get back up in the same movement. Yeah. And, it was very...
He was an athlete, that man.
He kind of, in some ways, he kind of reminds me of Jackie Chan. Because when he's interacting with other people and using them as props, it's kind of the way Jackie works, except Jackie's a bit faster.
Well, and he was I like that in that he had absolutely no fear. He did not care about hurting himself. And that's the thing they leave out. He hurt himself quite a lot.
Yeah.
In his movies.
I didn't find that. What did you find?
I found he mostly bruises, because he was also an absolute master of pratfall. Okay. So he knew how to fall, he knew how to land, but once he started trying to use props, his back was all covered with scars. He got cut up a lot, but he never stopped. He would just keep going. He'd go, just stick a Band-Aid on me, I'm fine.
Yeah. Then things get kind of weird. So we see him when he's like 7, and he goes to the workhouse. Spoiler, in real life he actually went twice, but that's fine. That's the Dickens novels part, because it's like, your family has no money, so you're going to go and make shoes or something.
That was absolutely real, though. Oh, yeah. The workhouses were real, and they were a nightmare.
Yeah. I mean, that's why there's Dickens novels. Half of the Dickens novels take place either in them or because of them. But they didn't sing, and there was, plenty of porridge for everyone. But then he's suddenly 12, and it's like, okay, I mean, basically saying nothing particularly exciting or interesting happened between 7 and 12. That's probably true. Nothing interesting happens to most people. But then you blink, and it's Robert Downey Jr., and it's like, what happened? And his brother, it's actually not his brother, it's his half-brother, Sid, is there, and then he's gone. He's off with the Navy, and then he's back, and apparently they don't even say this really. He's just like, I can get you a job. Well, why can you get me a job? Well, it turns out that Sid has actually been trying to be an actor himself, and has a job with this big producer in England, and that's why
Carno.
Yeah, the Magnificent.
Yeah. You are correct, Winky Breath.
Sis boom ba. And this is one of the problems that I have with the film, is that starting fairly early on, things are kind of disjointed. They start to feel like bits and pieces sewn together with Robert Downey Jr. as the one and only thread. And Charlie Chaplin, if one or the other, it doesn't really matter. Because some characters come and go, we don't even know who they are. Like Rolly, the projectionist / editor, we hear his name once, and he's working with Max Sennett. The next thing we know, Charlie's somewhere else, but Rolly's with him. Yeah. I don't know if that's because that was a real thing, or they just decide, well, why hire somebody else? We have this David Duck something. Well, he'll never be anything. We'll just give him a break and let him do the rest of the film.
It does, and little things that they throw around, like there's a sequence where he meets Edna Purviance, this secretary in a cafe. This is actually how he met her. And she becomes she's the main love interest in, I think it's The Kid or Modern Times. Yeah. She's the one in the bean eating scene.
Right.
She's on screen for about 2.5 minutes.
Yeah.
She was in 33 of his movies.
Yeah. He worked with her a lot.
She was with him the whole way, and he liked her so much. They may have had a romance. I think they did. But he liked her so much that even after she left the business, Chaplin Studios kept paying her like a stipend every month.
Yeah. Same thing with the kid, because you see scenes of the kid, and it's actually from the movie The Kid. They didn't try and reshoot it. And you see him going, wow, I love that kid. They never tell you who it is. It's Jackie Coogan, who would like not only continue to act, he's probably best known as Uncle Fester on the Addams Family, but he would show it. He was also Mr. Duggan in the one episode of The Brady Bunch where Carol has a car accident. I know. Never mind.
Okay.
Hey, I remember dumb crap.
Yeah,
but
and there's
like,
something
we don't see any connection with Chad. He's like, oh, I love that kid. I guess I'll just never talk to him or do anything with him again. Just one of those moments. Like it seems like you're trying to make a connection between our main character and somebody who he's not going to actually sleep with, and then you decide not to do it. So weird.
Some of it is.
Also, there's this scene where he suddenly creates the tramp character.
Well, I did like the fact that they point out, because when he's telling the story, it's like magic, and the hat leaps into his hand, and the cake, and then the biography basically calls BS, literally.
Yeah.
He says, you know that. He says, yeah, but the truth is no fun. And because it took him, they make it look like it took a few minutes, admittedly. It took him weeks to figure out the tramp character, to figure out what to wear, what the makeup would be. He didn't just slap it together.
Yeah.
It was a very careful, painstaking process.
And he talks about things, I read a little bit about this, where he wanted the entire costume to be contradictory. So you have a very tight vest, but very loose pants. A very tight hat, but very big shoes. So the whole thing was meant to be very disjointed, but in a very, very specific way. But he did say that once he finally got the costume right, the character fell into place. And that I can believe, but I did appreciate Anthony Hopkins basically saying, no.
That's not how it happened, Charlie. Don't kid a kidder, basically.
But and this is a long film. This is over 2 hours, 2 hours and 20 minutes. I mean, it's not as bad as some of the other films we've watched. But his rise to fame is really like, you just
easy.
Blink. Yeah.
Yeah. It's done, and I don't know, maybe it was. But that's kind of a problem with it, is it's a little hard. Everything just falls in his lap.
Yeah.
I mean, he's literally on some vaudeville tour, and he gets a telegram from Max Sennett offering him a job, just out of nowhere. There's no implication that he even applied for it.
And that was even one of the things that I found that was not exactly... They gloss over those things. He was actually... he didn't start doing singing when he was a little kid. He was actually doing a dance act. He wasn't doing comedy, and his big break was actually playing somebody called Billy the Page Boy in a Sherlock Holmes play, which toured 3 times through the UK. So for over 2.5 years, he was playing this part in a play, which they don't even talk about. Then he gets picked up by that guy Carno, and he tours the U.S. for 21 months. It wasn't like, well, I guess I'll start in Montana. My big break, I'm at Schrafft's, or whatever.
That's right, he's out in Butt, Montana. Butt. I know it's beautiful.
You know one of the people he was on tour with?
No.
Stan Laurel.
Oh, wow.
Did not mentioned at all, because, of course, Stan Laurel would do basically the same thing as Charlie Chaplin. He'd go from the stage into the silent films, and then he would continue. When he got back to England, he was home for like 3 or 4 months, and then he started another tour for about another 8 months, and that's when he got the notice. So it wasn't like this, I performed in this podunk town, and I get a telegram. There was like almost, 3 years worth of touring that got him noticed, but we don't need that.
Yeah, it does make it look like he just fell into it, and does a disservice both to him and to the process itself.
Yeah.
Which is unfortunate. And they do gloss over a lot of, especially the romances, the fact that, boy, did he like jailbait.
At least they mentioned the term, but yeah. And
that was uncomfortable.
I will say that the camera does focus on the young women in this movie in ways that I generally don't like, because, of course, they're trying to sexualize them, except in this case... They're doing it, or Richard Attenborough is doing it on purpose, because he's like, this is how Chaplin saw women. And
he even says that in his autobiography. He just never met a woman without immediately thinking about getting her in bed.
Yeah, and so the camera will sit there, it's like, somebody dropped something, they bend over, and we're looking right at her cleavage. Yes, it is sort of, I hate to use the word titillating, but that's how Chaplin would have looked at her, and it's like, oh, and she has a personality later. Okay, great.
What did you think of the fact that we see Charlie's alleged first love, Hetty, a showgirl, and then Una O'Neill, his last wife, they're both played by the same actress, Moira Kelly.
Are they?
Yeah. You didn't know? Yeah. You must have, yeah.
I did not notice
they are,
that.
I think they dye her hair. But,
a lot, because she was a redhead in the beginning of the film.
Yeah, and Moira Kelly is, in fact, a brunette. What did you think of that? I found that a little too precious.
I would have if I'd noticed it. I mean, it's obvious he found somebody that reminds him of Hetty, whom he never got over. And that part was true. She actually did marry a banker or a financier, and she died when she was 28. So that part was true. I guess, I don't know. Obviously, it bothered you.
Well, it annoys me when that's gimmicky, I think. And I think it's unnecessary. Nothing against Moira Kelly, who I think is terrific. But it just... It's kind of shoving it in your face. Like, get it? Get it? She reminds him of his lost love, and she's played by the same actress. You see? This movie is not big on subtle.
No.
I mean, there's some of it is pretty obvious when he's a kid, when he's in his 12-year-old, and we see him making fun of some drunk, who we call Rummy, and you notice that the drunk's walk is exactly the walk he'll use for the tramp.
Yeah, I had that in my notes. I thought that was like, don't do that. Don't.
Yeah, that's...
No. We don't know that any of that is true, so don't... I hate it when they do that. Like, they have to make famous artists or actors or singers or whatever, their moments have to have come from some one place. It can't just be a natural, organic process. Because he made fun of this guy, that's where his whole character... No, it probably didn't. Like, I never read anything that said he got it from that. And it's like they can't... Hollywood's really bad at depicting people succeeding from hard work. Like, it's like somehow you can't do that. And here... like we just talked about, he toured for almost 3 years. He played the same character for 2.5 on the stage and got noticed for that. And then he didn't just go from Mack Sennett to one other company. He went through 3 other companies before, and they barely talk about this, before he, Mary Pickford, Doug Fairbanks, and a couple other people formed United Artists. United Artists was a growing concern for a really long time, and the idea behind it was that these were people that were deciding, hey, we don't want to just be told what to do, we want to have control over our work. And it was, pretty revolutionary for the time, which is probably also why he got in trouble. But they barely talk about United Artists. It's just sort of a blip.
You were mentioning how there were people who protested some of his movies. One of his most controversial was The Great Dictator.
Yeah.
Which was his... And it was. He couldn't stand Adolf Hitler. It drove him crazy that they had the same mustache. Which, by the way, is probably a coincidence. I read one thing that said one of the reasons for Hitler's short mustache is he was a soldier in World War I, and anyone with facial hair kept it trimmed very close to get a better seal with the gas mask.
Sure. The Brits had them too. I mean, that wasn't just Charlie. It was a thing.
No, it was a thing. Apparently, Hitler really liked Charlie Chaplin movies. He enjoyed them a lot. He got a private copy of The Great Dictator. And there is at least one rumor that it made him cry. There's no proof of this, but...
Probably not the last 5 minutes. I haven't seen the film, but apparently the final 5 minutes of that movie is a speech with Chaplin dropping character, just facing the camera and pleading for an end to war and fascism. Franklin Delano Roosevelt, I can't say Roosevelt, FDR. Yep. I should have just said FDR. That's what I wrote. Why didn't I just say FDR? He liked it so much, he had Chaplin read that speech at his 1941 inauguration.
He also liked it. Chaplin was actually thinking that he wouldn't put out the film. He made the film, he didn't want to release it because by that point, he said, I don't think Hitler's a joke. I don't think this is something we should make fun of. FDR got in touch with him and said, he was also worried about boycotts. He said, release this film. I want you to release this film, and I guarantee you, by the way, that no one in the U.S. and none of our allies will boycott this film. That's
No.
how important he thought it was.
It did get some bad write-ups, but it was generally well received. It was not as successful as like the Gold Rush or anything like that, but it was generally well received, which they also kind of gloss over in here. It's funny because this film is like, often when you get biopics, you get, whole cloth lies or real messing about with the timeline. Since we already talked about it, we're not going to bring it up in this series, but Bohemian Rhapsody, for example, man, it's like that film leads you to believe that after Live Aid in 1985, Queen never performed again, Freddie Mercury died, and that was the end of it. And as it turned out, he hadn't even been diagnosed yet, and they went on to continue to record until 1992. It's kind of sad they left it out because he was shown as being very bravely working up until the very last minute that he possibly could, and they just decided that wasn't worth putting in.
Yeah, they do. That's what happens with these. Also, this was based largely on Chaplin's own work.
Right.
On his own autobiography. He's going to want to make himself look a little better.
Yeah, but he was dead by the time they made this, and Edinburgh, I don't know that Edinburgh actually knew him, so yeah.
No, I don't think so, but...
So yeah, I would say that this film is... It's generally fairly factually accurate. It's mostly omission that it's its issue. And some of the stuff they omit, I think, is really too bad. We really barely get a sense of any of his movies. Like, we get a little bit of City Lights, which is the young woman who's blind, who, how does she figure out that the guy's rich and mistake Charlie Chaplin for the rich guy? We see a scene of that. We see a little bit of The Kid. We see the one scene from the Gold Rush, which takes place. We see them filming.
We see a little bit of Modern Times, yeah.
But, like, we don't get any sense of his films, like, what's in them and what he's trying to portray and what he's trying to get across, which is kind of weird.
I don't know. I think, at least in 1992, people were still pretty familiar with his movies. I grew up watching them. A lot of people grew up watching them.
I think I had seen bits and pieces.
Oh, I'd seen like a dozen of them in their entirety.
But that's the thing, is you're not necessarily making a biopic or a factually based film for people who already know the facts. You're supposed to be making it for people who don't generally know as much and want to learn more.
Yeah, but you don't want to fill the thing with clips of other movies.
No, but on the other hand, we don't even see him making them that much. Like, we hear him talking about, oh, this film's taking me forever, and oh, we don't even hear that the films are doing as well as they are. Like, oh, Charlie's doing well, but like, dear gods, they still don't portray anything close to how much money he was making for the time. $5 million seems like chump change now, but that was nuts back then.
I think they do. I think they do show it. I don't agree with that. I think they show it in terms of, like, you see his house and his car and his chauffeur and the fine clothes, and how everyone defers to him, and how people go nuts wherever, and they all recognize him. I think we get a pretty good idea that he's how successful and how rich he is.
I don't think in comparison to the times we do, because we expect Hollywood stars to be rich, right? But this is different. There aren't any. This is a whole new thing. They also do, there's one thing that they really kind of mess up, and I'm like, why did they decide to do that? So when he takes that trip back to England, they portray it as being this sort of like, cold water to the face.
You can't go home again sort of thing.
And actually, he enjoyed it so much, he wrote a book about it called My Wonderful Visit. So it's like, maybe not so much.
I wondered why it felt like such a bad melodrama. That sequence, which is only about 10 minutes long, it feels awkward. It doesn't feel believable the way a lot of the rest of it does. What did you think? One of his Chaplin's big controversy or conflicts with himself and with everyone, in effect, was when Talkies came out.
Right.
And everyone, including his own brother, who was his manager, was bugging him to make Talkies, and he wouldn't do it. And we see this in the movie. He's absolutely adamant. The tramp can't talk. You think he was right?
Yes.
Yeah, I do too.
It's just, that's the way the character was conceived, and it's not a case that Charlie couldn't talk, but that's not how the character evokes its what it wants to say. It's everything is in movement, and as he points out very smartly in the film, it's like, You talk about talkies, you're leaving out the other 9/10 of the world that doesn't speak English, who can watch my films and don't need anybody to tell them what's going on. Yeah, there's probably some title cards that get translated out, but that's like, a day's worth of work.
He didn't use a lot of title cards, not compared to a lot of the other silent movies, which some of which you had to read like it was like reading a novel.
Yeah.
But he's right, because, and I think it was because the whole idea was the tramp was supposed to be an everyman.
Right.
And he couldn't have his own voice because he had to have our voice. He had to have everybody's voice. You could put your own voice in him. I liked that, and I think he was dead on about that.
Well, interestingly, the movie he was talking about that time, which was City Lights, that's the one with the young blind woman, which came out in 1931, he still earned $3 million from that movie. So 4 years after Talkies, and it was like, no, I'm doing this. Now, he did finally break.
Yeah, he made some.
Yeah. Well, The Great Dictator is in sound.
But he made like 5 or 6, I think, that had sound in them.
Yeah, but he also isn't really the tramp in that film. He's playing the dictator character, so it is different. And actually, thankfully, they show one of the most interesting clips from that, and it's the one where the dictator is playing with the giant globe that's a ball, and Chaplin's movements, his balletic movements playing with that giant globe are just amazing. They're just so graceful. It really showcases the fact, like, when you see somebody fall and you see them, in fist fights and stuff in the slapstick, you don't think of grace and you don't understand the control, but the grace he shows in that scene is a really nice counterpoint to just the regular getting hit with a fish.
Not that we don't enjoy people getting hit with a fish.
Well, I know I do.
Yeah. So we had some questions you came up with about this that we're going to apply to this movie and to some of the other biopics.
Yep.
What do you got?
So we're going to try and, as Max said, aim these at the other films too. But what do we know about Chaplin from this movie? What does this movie teach us?
Now I think brings up a really interesting question about this movie and about the way it shows him. We know a heck of a lot about what happens to him and what he does. We know almost nothing about his inner life.
No.
We don't know how he feels about most things, what he thinks about most things. And I actually thought that was, and I think that was one of the things people didn't like about the movie in some of the reviews I've read. But the thing is, that's what also is in his autobiography. It's lots of names, dates, places. It's very informational, but there's very little introspection. And we see from when he's talking to the biographer, when he's talking to Anthony Hopkins, who cares what the character's name is? It was Anthony Hopkins. And he doesn't want to talk about how he feels about things. He talks about, he mentions one of his wives. He only mentions her, and he gives 2 sentences in the book to her.
Right.
That's absolutely true. And I think the movie is saying that. It's saying, yeah, Chaplin, we don't know anything about him. It's not just you don't watching this movie. Nobody does. Maybe his wives did. Maybe Una knew him because she was with him the longest. She
stayed with that. I gotta say, as weird and lopsided as that relationship was, she not only stayed with him for the rest of his life. They had 8 kids together.
Yeah, 34 years they were married.
And apparently, she adored him. 34 years different. No, what was it? 54,
yeah, it was,
37 years difference.
36-year difference.
37. Well, they were together. They didn't get married till she was 18.
So. Okay.
And that would set a precedent for Hollywood, but
that didn't set anything. Come on, older men marrying younger women. That goes back to pretty much as far as there have been older men and younger women.
It does?
Yeah. Well, I know. Try to control your shock, but yeah, this movie does not teach us much about Chaplin the person.
Yeah.
We see him as the icon and as the pioneer, but we end up not knowing much about him. There's not a lot of emotional depth to this movie. The only time there is any is when his mother and his daughter, the same person, are on screen.
Yeah.
There's a little of it there.
And the weird part is they gloss over that, too, because it turns out that the mother never left the mental hospital. She actually, once she was committed the second time, she spent the rest of her life there. There was no house by the sea. There was no trip to the U.S. Although
which is usually what happened in situations like that, yeah.
In the film, we see the mother, we see her on stage, we then see Charlie working, and she's starting to go a little cuckoo. And then we see her committed, but it's like in between there's like no mention of her at all. She just disappears off screen. And then once she's committed, he just wanders away as if nothing ever happened. Weird thing is, he actually was sent to live with his dad. He and his brother were they were saying that the father was out of the picture when Charlie was young. It's like, no, they didn't know him well. His dad was a drunk, but they still went to live with him. And Sid is now here's the other thing that they talk about, which is really kind of odd. Sid's his half brother. He was an illegitimate child from the same mother. Before, obviously, that she got married. And the father, whose name I forget, Charles Chaplin Sr., whatever, it wasn't Charles, accepted him into the household, and they raised them together. And then there's this question about, later on, about, when World War II is coming up in the Nazis, and Charlie's uptight because his brother is a, quote, half Jew. Well, here's the thing. Either they're both Jewish or neither of them is Jewish at all, because, Max, correct me if I'm wrong, you follow the bloodline in Jewish culture through the mother, not the father.
In the strictest sense, yes. However, the Nazis had a whole flow chart for how you determined if someone was Jew. Oh, no, I ain't kidding. They didn't call it that, but it was a flow chart for how you determine, like, okay, if this paternal grandmother was Jewish, or if this second cousin's hairdresser's college roommate was half Jewish. It was a whole thing.
Yeah.
They were very much, and besides back then, well, not back then, there is still those who argue that Judaism is a race, that it is, if there's any genetics involved in it, if your father is Jewish, you're still part Jewish. We're not going to get into that. But
no,
yeah,
because we have to bring in Sammy Davis Jr., and then things get kind of...
Well, he was a convert. That's different.
They don't allow that, do they?
Sure. Depends who you ask. If the really Orthodox don't, but yeah, Judaism does allow conversion.
Okay. I guess he did it. So
you're never allowed to buy retail again. But sorry,
but you do know where the good Chinese food is.
You do know where the good Chinese food is. That is a requirement. But
Max can say that.
I can. But yeah, he was, and a lot of people, for whatever reason, the same way, assumed Chaplin was Jewish.
Yeah.
And he was not.
No.
He never claimed to be. He was not. He never saw it as an insult, but as he said, I cannot claim that honor.
Yeah. How accurate was the depiction?
Well, as we've said, to a degree, it seemed pretty accurate. Now, the thing is, when we ask that, it's not like we are now Chaplin scholars.
No.
And have read a whole lot of stuff on him, but we've done, we look at some preliminary stuff, and we've also looked at what other people have said, people who actually do know, and it's moderately accurate, at least on the surface. It does, as Mike says, it commits mostly the sin of omission. It leaves out an awful lot.
Yeah.
And it skates over an awful lot.
Yeah, even factually, because that's what we're mostly looking at. Things they left out, like Chaplin was known for making literally hundreds of takes. In some cases, I think there was one scene he shot over 1,000 times till he got it right. There's a little tiny bit of that we see in the film. There's one point where it's, I forget her name, the secretary who's eating the beans.
Oh, yeah, Purviance. Yeah, Edna Purviance.
And then there's one later on where he does another take of something. But, that whole, obsessive nature of making and remaking till he gets everything exactly right, they don't even talk about it all. But I'm going to agree, it's mostly omission. And for a Hollywood biopic, that's actually pretty good, because a lot of times they'll just make things up and, shoehorn things in to make for a better story. And in this case, they didn't do that, and we'll talk about that at the end. The last question I think you kind of already answered, and it goes along with the first one. Do we feel we get to know the subject better after having watched this?
Yeah. Oh, very little. I mean, we know more about what happened to him. We don't really know him.
No. And maybe that's not a fault of the film. Maybe that's literally how he wanted it.
And that might be what the film is stressing, is that nobody knew. Is that he didn't let his guard down with most people.
I'm going to get to two last things, one of which, because I mentioned it early in the film, we talked about an assassination attempt. Yeah, this is something else they left out in the film. After I think it's after City Lights, he goes touring Europe and even Japan. He was gone for 16 months because he just couldn't deal with the talking picture world, the whole talkie thing, and just went to him. Strangely, he was part of a nationalist assassination plot to try and start a war with the U.S.
What?
There was actually a plot to assassinate Chaplin, thinking it would get the U.S. and Japan to start a war together.
Huh.
They found out about it in time, and they did actually kill a major official. I can't remember who it was, but I was like, really? There was an assassination plot to take down Chaplin to start a war in the 1930s.
You must kill Charlie Chaplin.
I mean, there should be a movie about that.
Yeah, seriously, can you imagine being the guy who's trying to sell that plan to the high command?
Yeah. Apparently they were going to go through with it, so I just thought that was hilarious.
Wow, that's pretty wild.
And also, they don't talk about any of Charlie's films. He made, I think, another 3 films after The Great Dictator. The last film was called A Countess from Hong Kong. Do you know who starred in that film?
I do not.
Sophia Loren and Marlon Brando.
Good Lord.
It was Technicolor and widescreen. Charlie only appears in it as a steward. It's the only character he plays. Otherwise, he's directing it. It was his last film. Didn't do very well. But they make it sort of feel like his form of storytelling, he couldn't adapt at all and just stopped making films. And the truth was, he did make a few more films and, often did have reasonable budgets, but they just weren't as memorable as his earlier stuff.
Yeah. And the end of the movie, the end of his story in a lot of ways is pretty sad. J. Edgar Hoover got what he wanted and got him out of the country.
Right.
And it's just he and Una went to England, and while he was out, they canceled his visa.
Yeah.
And wouldn't let him come back to the country, so he spent the rest of his life in Switzerland.
Well, apparently it wasn't that they weren't going to let him back in the country, but he had to face a board about, are you communist? Have you ever been a communist? And since there was no actual evidence against him, in all likelihood, they probably couldn't have kept him out, but he was like, the hell with it, I'm dumb.
You didn't need evidence. Good Lord, what they did to the Hollywood 10, they didn't have any real evidence, except that maybe they shook hands with the wrong person or got in a picture with the wrong person.
But you have to remember, this is way before that. We haven't gotten quite to that point yet.
No, we were getting close. This was, I think, 1952.
But even still, the article I read said the FBI really didn't have anything on him, so that likely he would have been let in, but it had so soured Charlie on America at that point that he said, the hell with it, went to Switzerland and he came back in 1972, but that was just for the Academy Awards.
Yeah, that's right. He was invited back to be given a special Oscar, and then he went back to Switzerland.
Yeah. And I'm sure that little scene where they're showing clips at the thing and Charlie standing there in the dark crying is, Hollywoodized, except that the people's reaction to his films was not. Like, I haven't watched silent films. I mean, who's talked about those in decades? But watching some of those scenes, I'm laughing. They're funny.
They really are. The guy was a genius, and it holds up.
Yeah. But before we get to the part where we decide if we think this film holds up, do you have any more points, Max? Or
no, I just wanted to make sure we got that in.
Do we want to do business before we get to the finality, or
no? We finish up the movie, then we do business.
Oh yeah, because we have to do things the same way.
We are consistent.
And now, the wrap up. The roundup, even though it's called the roundup, Max.
No, you tell me. What did you think of this movie?
My memory of it was better than I think it is. I think it's a good performance by Robert Downey Jr. I think it would have potentially led him in very different directions if not some tragic things happened to him that made him kind of unusable very soon, until he got control of himself. It's very disjointed. We go from vignette to vignette, sometimes not knowing how many years have passed. And in some case, it's quite a few. It's like, oh, darling, I love you. Next scene, there's twins. Where did the kid... really? The kids are like 9 years old. Like, we don't know how much money he's made, how many films he's made. There's no... Like, we're shown like 3 films he's put together, but the number of films that Charlie Chaplin actually made, the amount of footage... we don't really have any idea of it. His mother, oh no, the mother's tragic, she's gone. Oh, she's back, and she's gone again. The brother Sid goes away for a while. He comes back, he doesn't age, Charlie does. And in fact, we have to remember, Sid's like, I don't know, 8 or 9 years older than Charlie, except he only looks that way when they're younger. And the old age makeup, and speaking of which, the old age makeup in Switzerland's okay, but then the old age makeup in 1972 is, terrible. It's awful.
He looks like a burn victim.
I think there are good things in this film. Kevin Kline's a standout. He's not in there a lot, but he makes a great Douglas Fairbanks. Because of the way the film meanders and doesn't really give us a lot of depth, even of his history factually, I don't think it's a particularly great film. I think for its length, I would rather have felt more complete one way or the other. Like we got to know the person more, and if that's not possible, we need to know the career more. And they kind of did a little bit of both, and not nearly as much of his career as I would like to have seen. But again, we pointed out, factually, not bad. Mostly a mission, which, you got to cut somewhere. Maybe they filmed it. We don't know. Maybe the assassination plot in Japan is in there somewhere.
Maybe the original movie was 4 hours long.
Yeah. How about you? What do you think?
I pretty much agree with you. I think the performances in this movie are terrific. I think this is definitely an actor's movie. It's great to watch them. Narratively, it's very all over the place. It also goes from melodrama to trying to be a little more realistic to in a very choppy way. It's really hard to keep track of the timeline. I don't mind jumping timelines. I don't even mind going back and forth in the timeline. But it needs to be consistent. It needs to be understandable. And I think, as you say, there are several points where you go, wait, how long has this been?
Yeah.
What year is this? Where are we? Where are my pants? What's going on?
Where's the fire escape?
Yeah. Again, I think it's a really interesting picture of some of Charlie Chaplin. We don't get any depth, but I think that may be kind of the point. It's kind of surfacey. There's not a lot of there. I can see why he got nominated and the picture didn't.
Yeah. I think that says it right there. Yeah.
Yeah. Nice job, Robert. But the movie itself is okay.
Yeah.
It's not spectacular. It's okay, and it's also, if you do want to watch, it's easy to watch it in pieces.
Yeah.
Because it's filmed in pieces.
Yeah. And it feels that way. And hey, if you don't know anything about Charlie Chaplin and never watched one of his films, they're silent. When you hear the soundtracks, he wrote those too. He did everything. He directed, he starred, he wrote.
He played a lot of the music on them. Yeah.
Yeah. He really was a genius in a time when this kind of visual communication didn't really exist except for on stage, but he was doing things you couldn't do on stage because he was doing a film. Watch a couple of his films. I mean, there's a reason people are still watching them over 100 years later.
It's worth it.
Also, real quick, TriStar and Carol Co. Remember them? Yeah, okay.
But let's get a little business out of the way here.
Yes.
You can, of course, find us on our... we haven't gone over to Talkies. Our website is completely silent at maxmikemovies.com.
No, it's the other way around.
Yeah, well, we've got the complete back catalog of all of our episodes in living black and white. You can also find us on social media at Facebook or Twitter at maxmikemovies.com. You can find us on the podcast app of your choice, and you can find us on Spotify. And if you have questions, comments, complaints, concerns, other words starting with C, you can email us at maxmikemovies.com, where we also hope you'll email us or leave a comment on our poll question about, have you ever walked out of a movie, and if so, which one, and why? So, what are we going to watch next week?
Well, I like to keep things themic. I mean, yes, we're doing biopics, semi-real people. So I wanted to do something else about another British person, another upper crust performer from Britain. You may have heard of, well, to be fair, it's about a pair. One of them is a performer. The other one is that person's spouse, I think.
Not sure.
It's a little film about a not very well-known singing sensation known as Sid Vicious. We're going to be watching Sid and Nancy, starring
movie.
A 12-year-old Gary Oldman, because I think it is. I think it's 1986, and he portrays Sid Vicious, and he also portrays Nancy. It's not a known fact.
He does
but
not.
I'm pretty sure he does.
Stop lying.
No, but to see if we're lying, tune in next week where we will Sid Vicious and Nancy.
Oi!
This has been a co-production of The Voice of Max and The Movie Wrench.